The house smelled of dust, old wood, and traces of the man they had buried that morning. Caleb stood in the parlor, listening as rain tapped against the tall windows. His relatives spoke around him, openly amused. "So, this is what grandfather left you?" His cousin laughed. Caleb looked at the cracked walls, faded curtains, and floorboards worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The house looked forgotten. "You should sell it," his uncle said, "before the taxes eat you alive." Another relative smiled. "You got the worthless property. We got the investments, accounts, and valuable possessions." They laughed together. Caleb said nothing. He had spent years being treated like the family disappointment. While others built businesses, bought expensive homes, and earned praise, Caleb had struggled to keep moving forward. Even at his grandfather's funeral, they had found another reason to remind him where he stood. His uncle handed him a folder. "There are debts attached to the house too. Honestly, you should be grateful if someone agrees to take it." Then they walked away, leaving Caleb alone. He tried to hide his disappointment. He had hoped his grandfather might leave him something meaningful. Instead, he had inherited a dying house nobody wanted. Then Caleb noticed the old walking stick. His grandfather's wooden cane leaned quietly against the wall nearby, beside a section of floor that looked slightly darker than the rest. Caleb stepped closer. He remembered that cane. His grandfather had carried it everywhere. Without thinking, Caleb placed one foot on the boards. A faint sound came from beneath him. Hollow. He froze. His relatives were already disappearing through the front door. Caleb stepped again. The sound returned, quiet, deep. He stared down at the floor. Something was underneath it. For the first time that day, Caleb stopped feeling sorry for himself. The inheritance everyone had called worthless suddenly felt like a question, and Caleb knew he had to find the answer. Caleb spent the next hour walking through the house alone, listening to every creak beneath his shoes. In daylight, the property looked even worse. Dust covered nearly every surface. Paint peeled from the walls in long, curling strips. Several windows rattled whenever the wind pushed against them, and a cold draft moved through the hallways like the house itself was breathing. His relatives had not exaggerated everything. Bills filled a drawer in the kitchen, some years overdue. There were notices about repairs, taxes, and neglected utilities. In the dining room, an antique table was scarred and covered with a gray sheet. Upstairs, one bedroom smelled faintly of damp wood, while another contained a broken wardrobe and a mattress stained by time. Caleb understood why everyone wanted him to sell, yet something bothered him. The neglect did not feel consistent. The kitchen had been left to decay, but his grandfather's study was surprisingly clean. The bookshelves were dusty, but every book remained carefully arranged. A brass clock sat on the desk, still wrapped in a protective cloth. Even the curtains were preserved better than those in the rest of the house. Then Caleb entered the small room at the end of the hallway. There, everything looked almost untouched. A chair stood beside a polished wooden table. Old photographs remained neatly stacked. A lamp sat exactly where someone had placed it years ago. Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Why preserve these rooms while allowing everything around them to deteriorate? He remembered his grandfather's voice from years earlier. "Never judge an old thing by how it looks, Caleb." At the time, the words had sounded like another lesson from an old man who valued patience. Now they felt different. Caleb returned downstairs and looked again at the damaged floor. His family had seen a worthless house, but his grandfather had chosen to leave it to him. Maybe the question was not why Caleb had inherited something worthless. Maybe the real question was why his grandfather had wanted everyone else to believe it was worthless. Caleb returned to the parlor before sunset, carrying a flashlight and the uneasy feeling that the house was watching him. He knelt beside the suspicious floorboards and ran his fingers across the wood. Most of the boards were dark, cracked, and worn smooth with age, but 3 boards near the wall looked different. Their grain was lighter, their edges sharper, and the nails seemed newer. Someone had replaced them. Caleb pressed his thumb against one corner. The board shifted. His heartbeat quickened. He carefully lifted it and found a narrow space beneath. At first, there was only dust and darkness. Then something metallic caught the flashlight beam, a tiny brass key. Caleb picked it up. A number had been engraved into its handle. He stared at it for several seconds. Why 1955? He searched the rooms, opening drawers, cupboards, and forgotten boxes. Nothing matched. Finally, he remembered the locked cabinet in his grandfather's study. He had noticed it earlier, but assumed it contained old papers. The key slid into its lock perfectly. Inside were only two things: a faded photograph and a folded piece of paper. Caleb unfolded the note. His grandfather's handwriting stared back at him. "If they tell you this house is worthless, believe them only long enough to find the floor." Caleb read the sentence twice, then again. A cold sensation moved through him. His grandfather had known. He had known Caleb would hear the same insults, see the same broken walls, and be tempted to believe the house was worthless. More importantly, he had known Caleb would eventually find the floor. Caleb picked up the photograph. It showed his grandfather standing outside the house decades earlier, beside several men Caleb did not recognize. Behind them stood the same building, but it looked completely different. Freshly painted, carefully maintained, almost prosperous. On the back, another number had been written. Caleb slowly lowered the photograph. This was no forgotten inheritance. It was a message. And somewhere inside that ruined house, his grandfather had hidden the reason why. For the first time, Caleb understood that the people who laughed at his inheritance had missed something. Perhaps they had never really known what the house contained. Perhaps his grandfather had made certain of that. Caleb returned to the cabinet and examined everything inside with greater care. Beneath the photograph were yellowed property documents, newspaper clippings, and several brittle pages covered in his grandfather's handwriting. One document showed the house as it had been decades earlier. Caleb unfolded the hand-drawn floor plan and immediately noticed something strange. The current house had 6 rooms on the ground floor. The old plan showed 7. He counted again. 7. One room had disappeared. Caleb carried the drawing into the parlor and compared it with the walls. The missing room should have occupied the exact area beneath the section of floor that had sounded hollow. His pulse quickened. He returned for a screwdriver and began removing the newer boards. One lifted easily, then another. Dust rose into the air as Caleb pulled away the final plank. Beneath it was not dirt. It was a rectangular metal hatch. For several seconds, he simply stared. The house suddenly felt different. It was no longer an abandoned property filled with broken furniture and unpaid bills. It was something deliberately constructed around a secret. Caleb brushed away the dust and found a small iron handle. He reached toward it, then stopped. Something caught his attention near the back entrance. Footprints. Fresh footprints. They crossed the dusty floor and disappeared toward the hallway. Caleb stood completely still. Those tracks had not been there earlier. Someone had entered the house. Someone had walked through the same rooms he had been searching. And if the footprints were fresh, whoever made them might still be nearby. Caleb slowly turned toward the dark hallway. The old house creaked. A floorboard groaned upstairs. He tightened his grip around the screwdriver. For the first time, the mystery beneath the floor no longer felt exciting. It felt dangerous. He looked back at the metal hatch. Whatever his grandfather had hidden down there had been important enough to erase from the official plans. And apparently, important enough that someone else had come looking for it. Caleb stepped away from the hatch. He knew he should leave. Instead, he quietly locked the back door. Then he turned toward the hallway. If someone else wanted what was beneath that floor, Caleb needed to discover why before they found it first. Caleb did not touch the metal hatch again. Instead, he returned to the study and carefully checked every document he had removed from the cabinet. He remembered exactly where each one had been placed. One page was missing. His stomach tightened. He searched the desk, then the floor, then the cabinet itself. Nothing. Someone had moved it. His phone rang. It was his uncle. "You need to sell that house, Caleb." The words came without a greeting. Caleb leaned against the desk. "Why?" "Because it isn't worth keeping. You don't understand what you're taking on. You seemed pretty happy about my inheritance earlier." Silence. Then his uncle lowered his voice. "I'm trying to protect you." Caleb almost laughed. "You never cared about protecting me before." His uncle became impatient. "Just sign the sale papers. I'll find a buyer." Caleb looked toward the parlor. "No." He ended the call. That single word felt strangely powerful. Hours later, darkness covered the property. Caleb stayed in the study trying to make sense of everything. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The old house settled around him with occasional creaks. Then he heard footsteps. Caleb froze. A floorboard groaned somewhere downstairs. He switched off the lamp. Another sound followed, a faint scrape. Someone was inside. Caleb moved silently toward the hallway and saw a shadow pass across the doorway. He waited, holding his breath. Then the back room went quiet. Caleb rushed toward the sound. A window stood open. Its latch had been forced. Cold rain blew through the opening, scattering papers across the floor. Caleb checked the house. Nothing obvious was missing. The cabinet was still there. The old documents remained untouched. Then he looked at the study desk. The photograph was gone. His grandfather's photograph, the one showing the house in 1955. Caleb's fear changed into certainty. Whoever had entered the house had not come for jewelry, furniture, or money. They had come for information. They knew something was hidden here, and somehow they knew which piece of evidence mattered. Caleb closed the window and locked it. Then he looked toward the floor. The secret beneath those boards was no longer just his grandfather's mystery. Someone else knew it existed, and they were willing to break into the house to keep Caleb from discovering the truth. Caleb waited until morning before opening the hatch. He had barely slept. The missing photograph, the forced window, and his uncle's strange urgency had turned the house into a question he could no longer ignore. He lifted the metal hatch. A breath of cold, stale air rose from below. Caleb switched on his flashlight and climbed down a narrow wooden ladder. His shoes touched a concrete floor nearly 8 feet beneath the house. The chamber was smaller than he expected. Shelves covered the walls, holding sealed boxes beneath layers of dust. Nothing appeared disturbed. It looked as though someone had locked the room and walked away decades ago. Caleb opened the nearest box. Inside were ledgers. Another contained old bank statements. A third held property deeds wrapped carefully in waxed paper. There were photographs too, dozens of them showing land Caleb had never seen. Then he found the steel container. It was heavy, black, and secured with an old combination lock. Caleb set it aside for the moment and opened a ledger. The first pages contained names, dates, and purchase prices. Then Caleb saw something that made him stop breathing. His grandfather had purchased several parcels of land in 1955 for amounts that seemed almost absurdly small. Caleb recognized some of the locations. They were now among the most valuable commercial areas in the region. He turned another page. Newspaper clippings described a massive development project that had transformed the area decades later. Roads, shopping centers, offices, and residential communities had appeared where empty fields once stood. The value of those parcels had exploded. Caleb stared at the numbers. This wasn't a forgotten box of cash. It was something far larger: ownership, land, assets that could be worth millions today. His hands began to tremble. Why had his grandfather hidden all of this beneath the floor? And why had the family never mentioned these properties? Caleb opened another document. Several lines had been crossed out in red ink. Beside them, his grandfather had written 3 words: "Never trust them." Caleb looked around the chamber. For decades, this room had remained untouched beneath a house everyone considered worthless. Now he understood. The broken floorboards were never hiding a useless secret. They were hiding a fortune, and someone had already tried to steal the first clue. Felt smaller. Caleb finally understood the real question. It was no longer where the fortune was. He knew where it had been protected. The question was far more dangerous. Who had stolen the rest? Caleb remained at the desk long after midnight. The documents were spread across the wooden surface in front of him, each one revealing another piece of a story his family had spent decades hiding. He read the disputed property records again. Then he noticed something. Every suspicious transfer happened within a narrow period of time, 1958 to 1962. Caleb pulled the ledger closer and searched for the same dates. There they were. His grandfather had written several entries in the margins, but most had been crossed out. One sentence remained visible beneath the ink. Pressure came from inside the family. Caleb's chest tightened. He turned to the next page. A list of property addresses appeared beside several names. Some belonged to his uncle's father. Others belonged to relatives Caleb had heard mentioned throughout his childhood. But one address stopped him completely. It was not a family property. It was a bank. Caleb checked the date. Beside the address, his grandfather had written, "Account transferred without authorization." Caleb immediately opened another folder. Inside was a faded bank statement. The account had contained an enormous amount of money for that time, but the balance had eventually dropped to almost nothing. Someone had withdrawn it. Caleb studied the signature. It looked like his grandfather's, but something about it felt wrong. The handwriting was too stiff. He placed the original beside another document bearing his grandfather's genuine signature. The difference was obvious. The signature had been forged. Caleb leaned back. His uncle's demand suddenly made sense. They weren't afraid of the house. They were afraid of what Caleb might discover inside it. He began searching for every document connected to 1961. After nearly an hour, he found an envelope hidden between two property files. It had never been opened. Across the front, his grandfather had written, "Caleb, only if they come looking." His hands froze. The letter was addressed to him personally, but Caleb had not even been born when it was written. He slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His grandfather had written only a few lines. "If you are reading this, they have already realized the house is no longer safe." Caleb stopped breathing for a moment. He continued, "Do not trust anyone who asks you to sell." Then came the final sentence. "The fortune they stole is not gone." Caleb stared at the words. Beneath them was an address. Not the house, not the bank. Somewhere else. A place Caleb had never heard of. And beside the address were 4 words that made his blood run cold. They left one thing behind. By the following afternoon, Caleb had stopped trying to understand the documents alone. He placed copies of the deeds, bank records, transfer agreements, and his grandfather's letter into a folder and drove to a local attorney recommended by a longtime family acquaintance. The attorney studied the papers quietly. At first, his expression showed ordinary curiosity. Then it changed. "This is much bigger than an inheritance dispute," he said. Caleb leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "These transfers need to be investigated. Some of them appear highly irregular." Caleb felt a cold pressure settle in his chest. Before leaving, the attorney warned him not to surrender the original documents to anyone. "Make copies, store the originals somewhere secure, and don't sign anything your relatives put in front of you." Caleb followed that advice, but somehow the family already seemed to know. That evening, his aunt called. Her voice was suddenly warm. "We've been thinking about you, Caleb. We should sit down and discuss everything together." Everything? The inheritance? The properties? Your grandfather's wishes? Caleb remained silent. She continued, "You're young. You may not fully understand what those documents mean. We could help you manage things." A week earlier, she had laughed at the idea that the house was worth anything. Now she sounded concerned. Caleb declined. The next morning, his uncle appeared at the property. He wasn't alone. A lawyer stood beside him, holding a leather folder. "We need to discuss ownership," his uncle said. Caleb didn't invite them inside. His uncle's expression hardened. "Those assets belong to your grandfather. That means the entire family may have a claim." Caleb looked at the lawyer. "Then why did everyone tell me there was nothing left?" Neither man answered. The silence told Caleb more than words could. His uncle stepped closer. "If you continue refusing to cooperate, we'll take legal action." Caleb felt fear, but beneath it was something stronger. Clarity. They weren't trying to protect him. They were trying to reach the documents before he could prove what they had done. That afternoon, Caleb returned to his attorney. "I want everything traced," he said. "Every property, every transfer, every account, every signature." The attorney nodded. "It may take time." "I don't care." Caleb placed the folder on the desk. "For the first time, I want the truth to have nowhere left to hide." And as the investigation began, Caleb realized the fortune was only half the story. The other half was who had stolen it. The investigation took nearly 3 weeks. During that time, Caleb barely spoke to his relatives. His attorney contacted banks, property offices, historical archives, and government record departments. One by one, old files began emerging from places no one in the family had bothered to search. Then came the first confirmation. An archived property register contained the original record of one of Caleb's grandfather's purchases. The deed matched the document Caleb had found beneath the house. The signature was genuine. The purchase was legitimate, and most importantly, the property had never been lawfully sold. Caleb stared at the report. Then how did someone else end up owning it? His attorney slid another file across the desk. That is exactly the problem. Inside was a transfer document dated decades later. The signature appeared to belong to Caleb's grandfather, but the archive contained a second copy with a completely different signature. The fraudulent version had been used to transfer the property. Caleb felt anger replacing disbelief. It wasn't a family misunderstanding. Someone had forged documents, and they had gotten away with it because the original evidence had disappeared from the family's visible records. Or so they thought. His attorney discovered another important detail. Caleb's grandfather had preserved copies of several transactions in separate archival files, including bank correspondence and payment records, proving that certain transfers had never been authorized. The evidence was overwhelming. Then the family made its move. Caleb received a formal letter claiming that his grandfather's properties had been distributed among relatives years earlier. The letter demanded that Caleb surrender the documents and acknowledge their ownership claims. His attorney responded with copies of the archived records. Within days, the family's confidence disappeared. One relative's signature appeared on a questionable transfer. Another relative's bank account showed payments connected to the same transaction. Then investigators found an old letter written by Caleb's uncle's father. It mentioned the property by name, and it contained a sentence that destroyed their story. The boy must never learn what happened. Caleb read it twice. The boy had been his father. Suddenly, the years of silence made sense. The family hadn't forgotten the past. They had protected it. But now the evidence was sitting in Caleb's hands. The relatives who had laughed at the old house were no longer laughing. They understood something Caleb was only beginning to grasp. The documents they had believed were destroyed had survived. His grandfather had planned for someone to find them, and that someone was Caleb. The legal battle lasted months. There were hearings, archived records, financial audits, and countless hours spent comparing signatures and property transfers. But the evidence never stopped pointing in the same direction. Caleb's grandfather had legally purchased the properties. The disputed transfers had not been properly authorized, and the original documents preserved beneath the old house proved it. Eventually, the court recognized Caleb's rightful claim to the assets connected to his grandfather's estate. Several properties were returned through legal settlements. Other financial interests were recovered after investigators traced the fraudulent transactions. The people responsible could no longer hide behind old paperwork and family stories. For Caleb, the victory felt strangely quiet. There was no celebration, no dramatic speech, just a moment when his attorney placed the final settlement documents in front of him. "You won," he said. Caleb looked down at the papers. He had spent months believing the goal was to recover the fortune. Now he understood that the money had never been the real battle. The truth was, that evening, Caleb returned to the house. The property looked different now, not because the walls had changed, because he had. He walked through the study and stopped beside the old desk where he had first opened his grandfather's documents. Then he entered the parlor. The broken floorboards were still there, the same boards everyone had walked across without ever wondering what existed beneath them. Caleb slowly stepped onto the floor. He remembered how his relatives had laughed at the house. They had called it worthless. They had told him he had inherited nothing, but they had been wrong. The old house had never been worthless. It had been a vault, a silent guardian protecting the evidence of everything the family had lost. Caleb looked toward the concealed hatch. For decades, his grandfather had trusted one future person to discover the truth. Not the relatives who claimed to understand the family. Not the people who believed they deserved the fortune. Caleb, the person everyone had underestimated. He finally understood why the house had been left to him. His grandfather hadn't simply given him property. He had given him the chance to finish what he couldn't. Caleb placed his hand on the old floorboards. For the first time, he smiled. The fortune had changed his life, but proving the truth had changed something far more important. It had given his grandfather's final act of trust a meaning. And now, after all those years, the truth finally belonged to Caleb. Months later, the old house no longer looked abandoned. Caleb chose to restore it instead of selling it. The damaged walls were repaired, the windows were replaced.
The wooden floors were carefully preserved, including the section that concealed the underground chamber. But Caleb refused to turn the hidden room into a showroom. It remained exactly as he had found it. The shelves still held the old ledgers. The photographs remained in their original boxes. The steel container sat beneath the desk where his grandfather had once worked. Caleb had transformed the chamber into a private archive, a place where the truth could never be erased again. With the recovered assets, Caleb paid off the debts that had followed him for years and secured a future he had once believed impossible. But he didn't spend his fortune trying to prove himself to the people who had doubted him. Instead, he helped restore a small community center near the property and quietly funded projects that helped families struggling to rebuild their lives. His relatives faced the consequences of their own choices. Some lost properties, some were forced to answer difficult questions. Others simply disappeared from Caleb's life. He never chased revenge, he didn't need to. The truth had already done more damage than anger ever could. One evening, months after everything had been settled, Caleb returned to the hidden chamber alone. He was putting away several documents when he noticed something beneath the original floorboard, a narrow envelope. He carefully pulled it free. His grandfather's handwriting appeared across the front. Caleb opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only a few words were written. "If you found everything beneath this floor, then you found what I needed you to find." Caleb read the next line. But remember, his eyes moved lower. The fortune was only the first truth. He froze. At the bottom of the page was a small hand-drawn symbol. Caleb recognized it immediately. He had seen the same mark years earlier, not on the property deeds, not in the underground chamber, but on one section of the original house, the wall behind his grandfather's old library. Caleb slowly folded the letter. Then he looked toward the ceiling. For months, he had believed the mystery was over. Now he understood that his grandfather hadn't left him a fortune, he had left him a trail. Caleb walked upstairs and stood before the old library wall. His hand hovered over the marked section. He smiled faintly. The house had already revealed one secret. Perhaps it had been waiting decades to reveal another, and somewhere behind that wall, another truth was still waiting.